Long ago, in a narrow valley of terraced fields and whispering bamboo, there lived a young potter named Saman. He was careful with his hands and quick with his laughter, and he could shape a lump of clay into a bowl that fit neatly into a child's palm. The people of the valley knew his work. They trusted his hands. Yet Saman carried a hunger inside him that could not be filled by the comfort of praise or the clink of coins. He felt, in the quiet between kiln bursts, an emptiness like a missing piece of song. Saman's days were full of chores, early mornings at the wheel, afternoons mending cracked pots, evenings trading gossip at the tea house. He loved friends and family, loved the rhythm of tasks, but the hunger persisted, a restless wanting that turned contentment into something flimsy as rice paper. Whenever he thought he had found a thing that would quiet the wanting, a new partner's smile, a plan for expansion, even the idea of becoming a respected craftsman in the distant city, the satisfaction would fade like incense. The wanting would reform, a serpent again, sliding through his ribs. One monsoon season, a traveling monk came to the valley. The monk wore simple robes, and his presence seemed to slow the noisy insects and the chatter of the market when he passed. He carried only a bowl and a threadbare blanket. He sat beneath an old peepal tree at the center of the village and began to teach quietly, as if offering seeds more than proclamations. The villagers gathered, some for entertainment, some for free food, and some, like Saman, because there is a certain ache in the human chest that seeks an answer even when it cannot say the question. The monk spoke about attention. There are two directions of life, he said. One points outward, to wealth, to reputation, to the belonging of crowds. The other points inward, to the clarity of our own heart and mind. Both directions are necessary, but when the outward draws all our breath, we forget the inward. We leave ourselves without a home. Saman listened and felt a strange warmth, as if a small lamp had been lit under his ribs. That night he could not sleep. He turned the words over like a new piece of clay. He returned to the monk the next morning and asked, "How do I find the inward? I have tried seeking joy in many things, but it slips away. The hunger remains." The monk smiled as if at an old joke and invited Saman to sit. To focus on yourself is not to close your doors to the world. It is to become fluent in your own mind, to recognize the winds of desire and the clouds of sorrow when they gather, so you may choose how to respond. If you do not know your own weather, any shelter someone offers you will feel hollow. "But how do I build such shelter?" Saman asked, his voice small in the open air. "With attention and kindness," the monk said. "Begin with attention. Notice when your mind is pulled. Notice the first breath of a craving and the first flare of anger. Name them. When they arrive, breathe through them as if you are blowing candles out without blowing the flame away entirely. Let the feeling be there and also watch it. This is the practice of attention." Saman tried. He sat beneath the peepal tree each morning and watched his breath as the monk instructed. At first his mind was a wild child racing along rooftops, leaping from thought to thought. The price of clay, the neighbor's gossip, the face of a girl who had smiled earlier. 5 breaths, 10 breaths, his mind performed gymnastics. He had expected a swift collapse into peace. Instead, he found himself more aware of his restlessness. Yet slowly, over days shaped like beads on a rosary, Saman began to notice small shifts. He saw that when a worry rose, it had a texture, a tempo. He noticed that desire came with a tightening in the chest, anger with a heat behind the eyes. This noticing did not yet stop the winds, but it gave him a window. He could stand at that window and watch the storms without being flattened by them. As his practice deepened, the monk gave Saman a new instruction. Practice kindness. Turn that attention you have learned into tenderness for yourself. Too often, when we notice our faults, we punish ourselves with stories. "I should not have done that," we say. Kindness is not indulgence. It is the honest acknowledgement that you are a human being in need of patience. Speak kindly to the parts of you that are afraid. If you will not teach the frightened child inside, who will? At first, Saman's kindness was clumsy. He would catch a resentful thought and scold it. "How could you be so foolish?" he would tell himself, and then feel worse. But the monk explained that kindness itself could be practiced, like sitting at the wheel. When you catch yourself judging, imagine offering a cup of warm tea to your own heart. Let the tea cool your sharp edges. Over time, the heart learns to accept its own heat. Saman began to meet himself not as an enemy to be disciplined, but as a companion learning a new language. He forgave himself small mistakes in the shop. He took rest without shame. He discovered that when he met hunger with kindness instead of panic, the hunger would sometimes dissolve and sometimes relent, leaving space for attention to be exercised. One evening, a woman named Maya, who worked across the fields and whose laugh was like pebbles thrown into a pond, came to Saman with news. Her father had fallen ill. The family had no money. She asked Saman if he would help collect herbs from the mountain ridge at dawn. Saman agreed. He felt his heart quicken at the chance to be needed, and also, secretly, at being near Maya. He cooked jars of ointment with the herbs and carried them to the small hut in the valley. As Saman walked back, he felt a familiar tightening, the desire to be praised, to win Maya's affection with his usefulness. He noticed the desire as the monk had taught, an itch starting at the nape of his neck, and he breathed. The itch did not vanish, but he saw it now and could choose his response. He greeted Maya without the desperate edge of seeking and found that a different kind of interaction unfolded. Warm gratitude, plain speech, and laughter that was not a reward he had to earn, but a communal meal they shared. Life, however, does not allow a steady climb. It arrives with seasons and exams. A conflagration came when the river that fed the valley was dammed by a landslide farther up the ridge. Water dwindled, cattle grew thin, tensions rose. Villagers argued about blame, and anger flickered into fights. Saman watched neighbors, once friends, argue over who should harvest what and when. He felt old furies swell up inside him, selfishness, fear, the wish to secure what little he had. One night, as lanterns dimmed, Saman went to the monk and admitted, "I thought my practice would make me unaffected. I see the arguing and I want to join, to defend my share." I am ashamed the monk did not scold. He simply said, "Attention without grounding can become sharp. Kindness without steadiness can turn soft. We must hold both, sit in the middle, understand the cause of the anger, fear. Fear speaks as if the future is certain and terrible. But notice, are you right now suffering? Can you breathe with what is present? See the anger, feel the worry, and then ask, what is my next small, wise action?" Saman realized he had been thinking in extremes, scarcity or abundance, pleasure or deprivation. This duality had been the engine of his unrest. He began to act differently. Instead of hoarding clay or shouting in farmer meetings, he proposed a rotation system for irrigation and organized a small emergency cooperative where people traded labor for grain. Some villagers scoffed, some helped. Step by uncertain step, the valley steadied. Saman's actions were not grand. He did not claim to be a savior. What he learned that season was that focusing on oneself, with attention and kindness, was not an escape from responsibility, but a way to meet it without burning. When he acted from steadiness rather than reactivity, his choices were clearer and more generous. The valley responded to such small, steady acts. Neighbors who had known him as merely a potter began to find in him a calm that anchored chaos. Years later, a distant nobleman proposed to buy Saman's kiln and invite him to shape ceramics in the capital. The city promised wealth and fame. For a moment, the old hunger reared its head. This could be the achievement that filled the emptiness. Saman imagined the bright, lacquered roofs of the city and the applause of aristocrats. He allowed himself a small fantasy of making a plate that would hang in a palace. He noticed the fantasy's pull, and he asked himself the monk's question, "What is the wise next step?" He paused and listened inwardly. He found that the image of teaching the children of the valley to spin clay came to him like a steady flame. He thought of the elders who felt lonely in the long evenings, of the way his own heart had learned to befriend itself under the peepal tree. The city's bright promise seemed gilded but not nourishing. He refused the nobleman. Instead, he built a larger kiln at home and invited young apprentices. He taught them not only the craft of clay but also the practice of attention before the wheel. Breathe, notice, center, shape. One apprentice, a quick-tempered youth named Raju, challenged Saman like a mirror. Raju wanted instant results. When a pot cracked, Raju blamed fate or cursed the clay. Saman watched Raju's fury and saw, as in the beginning of his own practice, how blame fertilized bitterness. He sat with Raju at the fire and told him the story of his early years, of the monk and the peepal tree, and the slow learning of attention. Raju wept, not because of the words alone, but because someone had seen his self and treated it as worthy of patient teaching. As Saman taught, he also continued to practice. In the quiet hours before dawn, he still sat and watched his breath. Sometimes old desires returned with new disguises. Ambition masqueraded as noble purpose, perfection as moral superiority. He noticed these disguises with a gentle curiosity. "Ah, there you are again," he would say inside, and then attend to the feeling without being swallowed by it. The practice had become a kind of homekeeping. When his mind wandered into directions that caused harm, jealousy of a fellow potter's success, or resentment toward a stubborn student, he would come back to breath, to kindness, to the small practical actions that remedied harm. The valley changed slowly over years. Children grew to adults. Some left for the city. Others returned with new songs. Saman aged. His hands, once nimble as reeds, grew calloused with a different story, steadier, less hasty. One harvest moon, when the village celebrated, they asked Saman to speak about what he had learned. He rose to the platform, looked at the faces, young, old, lit by lanterns, and for a long time said nothing. Saying can be a trap. Silence is often more honest. Then he told the simplest story he knew. When I was young, he said, I thought the answer to my hunger was out there. I chased praise, money, romance. I learned that these things can be pleasant, but they do not fill us. I learned that attention is like a lamp. It shows us what is moving inside. Kindness to ourselves clears the smoke. When we have both, we become useful. We are not perfect. We are simply present enough to act with a clear heart. A woman in the crowd asked, but when suffering comes, when grief or loss burns, how do you keep your attention from melting away? Saman answered honestly, suffering is a teacher who never stops. It shows us where we cling and where we turn away. At first, I thought focusing on myself meant being quiet and passive. It's not. It's a courageous turning. You see the pain, you hold it, and then you let the sweetness of kindness move through. Sometimes the pain remains and is bearable. Sometimes we change our actions to reduce suffering. We can't predict the horizon, but we can row the boat with steadier strokes. In the crowd, a skeptical old man said, but isn't focusing on yourself selfish? We should care for others first. Saman replied, if focusing on yourself becomes a refusal to act for others, then yes, it is selfish. But if focusing on yourself means learning to be awake and calm, you become more capable of helping others. A torch that is lit can light many other torches. A person who is wild with unexamined rage will spread fire. A person who has trained attention and kindness will be a cool and steady hand in the night. His words settled like ash. The festival carried on, drums and voices braided into the air. Saman returned to his wheel with the same steady rhythm. He continued to teach Raju and the other apprentices. He continued to tend to his own mind, the way a gardener tends to an old tree, pruning, watering, clearing the dead leaves. Years later, as his hair silvered and his movements grew slower, Saman heard that the monk who had changed his life had become known across the region for rare gentleness. People sent messages praising him. Saman felt gratitude like light through rice paper. He decided to seek the monk once more. He walked the valley roads until he found the trail the monk used long ago, and he followed it up past the terraces, up the ridge where the wind tasted of salt and iron. When he found the monk, he was older, thinner, but his eyes were the same steady wells. They greeted each other with the ease of two people who had once shared a cup. Saman sat across from him and said, I learned from you. Your words were a lamp for me. I taught others a little of what you taught me. I forgot the hunger. I did not find perfect peace, but I found steadiness. I am grateful. The monk looked at him and said, you have done what is needed. One of the greatest tests is whether a person will pass on what they have received. You taught your valley to be less frantic, to be kinder to itself. That is great. Saman smiled and took a breath. I still get caught, he admitted. Sometimes I fall into old traps. Vanity, jealousy, exhaustion. But then I remember the practice and begin again. I meet my mind as if it were a traveling dog, sometimes friendly, sometimes fierce, and offer it food and shelter without asking it to change at once. The monk nodded. There is no final height, he said. There is only the return to practice and the willingness to look. The river of our life keeps flowing. The better we learn to float, the less sinking there is. But we will always need to bail a little water. On his return to the valley, Saman felt his heart like an old bell, worn but harmonious. He resumed his days of teaching, potting, and sitting beneath the peepal tree. People now came to him not merely for cups but for counsel. He would tell them simply, pay attention, be kind to yourself, return to breath. He also admitted his failures. He told them about Raju's outbursts and his own jealousies. He spoke of the time he almost left for the city and how he chose to stay. His honesty made his counsel human and hence possible to follow. Once, a young woman who had been adopted by the valley after a storm asked him, how long will it take to be steady like you? Her hands were stained with clay from the day's work, and she watched him with a hunger like young sap. Saman laughed softly and replied, it takes as long as you need. Do not fixate on the finish line, for that is another road to restlessness. Make a small promise to yourself, 5 minutes of attention each morning and a kind word when you feel shame. Keep that promise like a seed in your pocket. Over time, you will forget why you worried so much. She nodded, pocketing the advice like a coin. Seasons turned. There were times of drought and times of harvest, times of laughter and times of grief. A fever once took Saman's eldest apprentice, and he watched the boy's body become still and cool. He felt a fresh wave of grief and the old places where fear nested. He sat, as he had taught, and let grief have its voice. He was tempted to craft wild words about the meaning of pain, but instead he made tea, listened to the family, and carried the boy's pot to the funeral pyre. He acted with kindness, and his steady breath became a quiet shelter. In the decades that followed, Saman grew in the valley's memory as both craftsman and calm teacher. He never claimed sainthood, he joked often and ate too much spiced rice at festivals. But there was something in his presence like the remembered cadence of a lullaby. It could soothe but also remind you to keep walking. Toward the very end of his life, when his joints ached and his fingers were knobby, the villagers gathered at his home. He sat with them and told one final story, the most important story he knew, not about becoming perfect but about returning. Life will always give you reasons to look away, he said. The world offers mirrors that flatter and flames that promise warmth. But the home is inside. The practice is as simple as waking up and choosing again and again to pay attention and to be tender toward yourself. If you do that, you will find that you are present for the people you love. You will make better pots. You will err less often. You will be kinder to your neighbors and to yourself. This is the gift. When the villagers wept and thanked him for the ways he had steadied their valley, he smiled and shook his head. It was not I alone, he said. We helped one another. We were sometimes small and foolish, but there was a tension among us, and that made all the difference. Then he closed his eyes. The end came quietly, like a lamp blown out without a gust. The valley continued, children grew, the kiln churned, the peepal tree shed leaves and flowered. People told the story of Saman the potter and the way he learned to focus on himself in order to be more available to others. They told it in the tea house and at harvest dinners, and to the small ones who used Saman's bowls as toys. Years later, Raju, now a potter whose hands had learned patience, sat with a young boy under the same peepal tree. He taught the child to breathe before centering the clay on the wheel. The child asked, "Why do we do this? Why the breathing?" Raju remembered Saman's gentle voice. He told the child, "Because when we know ourselves better, we are kinder to the world. When we are calm, our hands make better things. And when we are kinder, people come to us thirsty and leave with cups full of care." The boy frowned and asked, "But is that not selfish? Focusing on yourself?" Raju laughed and said, "No, little one. It is how we grow strong enough to hold others. If a pot is hollow and cracked, it can't hold water. We need to mend the inside so it can be useful. Focus on yourself so you can be useful." The boy nodded and began to shape the clay with unusual care. This valley story is small, and in one sense nothing remarkable. But in another sense it is everything. It is a map for a life that many seek. To be whole enough to be helpful, to steady oneself so that one's actions are less the flinging of shadows and more the placing of stones in a steady path. The teachings that Saman received were not magical incantations that removed desire. Rather, they were practical tools to see desire for what it was and to make wiser choices. Attention and kindness, practiced daily, became a lodestone. If you sit quietly for even a few breaths, you may begin to notice your own weather. Desire will rise like wind, craving like pressure in the chest, anger like fever. Name them. Give them a simple, quiet witness. Breathe. Do not hide from your inner storms, but do not be consumed by them. Ask yourself practical questions. What small action can I take right now to relieve suffering? Is the urge to react going to make things better? Is it necessary? Speak kindly to the parts of you that are afraid. Give the tired child inside a cup of tea and a place to rest. When you stumble, return again, without shame. This is not a once-and-done achievement. It is not a trophy you bring home. It is a practice. Like tending a kiln, you must manage heat and timing. Like shaping clay, you must learn the pressure of your own hands. Each day offers loads of clay to be shaped by your steadier self. The compass of such a life points inward to become more outwardly wise. When you are less driven by blind longing, you can choose actions that help not only you, but also your neighbors, your family, and the wide world beyond. To focus on yourself is to develop the capacity to see clearly and act rightly. It is humility, and if you are tempted to think this teaching is easy, remember Saman's own relapses. He still felt vanity and jealousy and fear even as an older man. The practice does not make you never fail. It makes you return faster, with softer hands. So begin with a breath. Take 5 minutes each morning to sit and watch your breath. When you notice a thought, say simply, "thinking," and return. When you notice a strong feeling, name it. Anger, desire, sadness, and breathe with it. Offer yourself a kind word. May I be gentle with myself. Then in your daily life, allow this attention to shape small actions, choosing generosity, pausing before speaking, helping someone because you can and because it makes sense, not because you need applause. The world will still present storms. The valley's river may still silt. People you love will leave, but your inner steadiness will offer something rare, a place where decisions are less frantic and more wise. You will be more present for those who need you, and you will be less likely to be carried by every wind. Focus on yourself so you can be there, fully, patiently, kindly, for the rest of life. This is the story of Saman the Potter, but it could be anyone's story. It is offered as an invitation to notice, to be kind, to return. The rest is the work of each day. May you find the quiet lamp inside you. May you keep it lit with attention and kindness. May you use its light to move with steadiness and to give cups of care to those who come to your table. So friends, how did you like this motivational story of Buddha? Do tell us in the comment box, and do not forget to share it with your friends. If you want to listen to more such motivational videos, then there is a link in the description of this video. Namo Buddhaya Jai Bharat.